Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and today we have a special guest joining us. I guess I'll just introduce you by name, Brian, Mr. Brian Reinhardt from NC State, and you could tell us exactly what your position is with the university and what it is that you do there.
Well, hey, Jay, I want to thank you for having me on. Like you said, my name is Brian Reinhardt. I will preface this where I am a Pittsburgh native, so I have been a Steelers fan since growing up, still watch every game on Sundays when I can, but currently working at NC State in the athletics department. I'm the Director of Athletics Digital Communications. We are basically the PR branch of the athletics department, so I work with our football team and wrestling team, going to practices, staffing all the games, traveling with the team, and obviously talking NFL draft. We cover the draft from our office, and with one of our guys getting drafted by the Steelers this year, it's even a little more exciting for me this year.
Yeah, it sounds like a perfect fit, not only being a Steelers fan, but also being right in the, what would you say, eye of the storm there over at NC State. The Wolfpack, correct?
Absolutely. NC State Wolfpack, we're in the ACC. We're not in Pitt's, we're a little cross rivals with Pitt, so we don't play them too much in football. But, with Pitt entering, we were actually up at Heinz Field this past year, so I got a little taste of the Pittsburgh rivalry in the ACC.
It is a different bit of an animal when you go to a Pitt game at Heinz Field versus a Steelers game. It's almost foreign to you if you're only familiar with Pitt and you go to Steelers, or you're only familiar with Steelers and you go to Pitt. But it's nice to get some of these different teams that come in into Heinz. Now, the funny thing is that it's a small world, because my alma mater is Youngstown State, and they actually went. We went up and played. I think it was Pitt's home opener for the year, Labor Day weekend or something, last September, and didn't look so good through the first half. Nearly came back and won it a game. If I'm not crossing my years, went to OT. So it's pretty crazy.
Okay.
And they're the FCS variety, so one AA school there. But yeah, it's really neat to get the different experience, because otherwise I'm not a Pitt guy. You know what I mean? I'm born and raised Northeast Ohio here, and it's exciting though. I was in a similar position with you and got to speak to some of the athletes with Youngstown State and some of these other areas, and just you get excited about guys that come from your own backyard, and it just so happens there's more than one, but one got drafted specifically by the Steelers in the 5th round would be Jaylen Samuels. Now, Jaylen Samuels being interesting for our listeners, because if you're not familiar and maybe you missed out on one of our previous shows talking about the draft, when I'm watching the draft and Jaylen Samuels' name come up, I am sure a reaction by many people is, who? And you look and you see you start looking it up. You start getting maybe alerts on your phone from the different apps, maybe an ESPN or NFL or Steelers, or you're looking at it on the TV, or you're flipping back and forth, and it says fullback, it says running back, and just what is it that Jaylen Samuels? Well, maybe you could best describe. How long have you been around with the program and Jaylen Samuels?
I went to West Virginia University, graduated in '99, came down to NC State then. So I've actually been working with the Wolfpack football team since then. And obviously Jaylen was a 4-year player with us. He was a freshman. He played as a true freshman in 2014 and played all 4 seasons. And I like how you're trying to explain his position, because I know what Jaylen Samuels brings, and I'll tell you a story about how we listed his position, but you're exactly right. The Steelers fans, I saw them there saying, why did we draft him a fullback? Why did we draft a tight end? Why did we draft him as a running back? So many different positions. I don't think he fits in one position. He's not a Knicks at fullback. He's not a big tight end that goes out and receives. We actually created a position for him this year. We had him listed as tight end as a junior, and we're like, well, he catches a lot of passes, he goes out in routes, but he doesn't block like a tight end. So we then thought, well, fullback, but then he doesn't get the carries as a fullback. So we actually, and other teams do this too, and I've heard the term before, but for the first time ever, we called him the H. So we had him sort of as an H-back. And, you know, even another story on that, the ACC in their preseason and postseason, they created a position, and we here at NC State, we love to take credit for it. They now have an all-purpose back position, and we call that the Jaylen Samuels position. So here at NC State, we took a little credit for it, and it just so happened the very first year he won the first team all-purpose player. So we took a little pride in that, but Jaylen just does so many different things. I don't think you can pigeonhole him in just one position.
You know, this reminds me of just trying to describe what this player may do at the professional level. Reminds me of another, well, maybe younger when he came out of college several years ago, but Denard Robinson, when he got drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars, they listed him as OW, which was offensive weapon. Now, of course, he was a quarterback, and they tried to convert him to a running back, and actually due to injuries, he saw some snaps and whatnot. So that's kind of intriguing. But yeah, I saw this because when you look up and you say, who is Jaylen Samuels? And you see he's 6 feet even, 225 pounds. And as you said, multiple year starter in college, played a lot of games. Actually, I don't know if that was 2017 or 2016 when he was listed as a tight end. He led all tight ends in the country, in the nation, in catches.
Yes.
So,
2016.
It's very intriguing to see that and then have him listed as a fullback. Now, the NFL on their draft site has him listed as a running back, which actually they may have edited or changed that post-draft. I'm not really sure, but it's quite interesting to see because he does truthfully line up just about everywhere. In fact, I put out a graphic, I think, when it was said, like, welcome to Pittsburgh for all of the new players. Each player got one, kind of almost like a trading card, right? And I put their position with there. I listed everything. I even listed quarterback because
you did? Good.
Yeah, well, he's lined up in the Wildcat, hasn't he?
Yes, he has lined up in the Wildcat and taken direct snaps.
I mean, it's...
But, you know, the interesting thing, too, he lines up at all these different positions. He actually is leaving NC State. He has the most career receptions out of any player, including wide receivers here. He scored the second most touchdowns in school history. He does it both rushing and receiving. I mean, he is going to be a huge weapon that, you know, for 3 years, that it's going to be hard to replace for us next year. But, you know, obviously that's what got him drafted, and that's his skill set.
And he's not just a receiver. See, this sounds like very unique because when you think of like Roosevelt Nix, you know, he had an amazing catch against the Baltimore Ravens. Very improbable, but not likely. It's not like the likely scenario. Fullbacks, they get their touches, like 5 touches a year if they're running the football. This is a little different here. Jaylen Samuels is kind of like how you would see like Le'Veon Bell lines up in the slot.
Yes.
He could run slants. He could run wheel routes. I mean, the guy could be placed anywhere. Line him up as a tight end. Line him up in the backfield. Hand him the football. I was trying to pull up the stats here, and I'm trying to look. They believe last season ran for 368 yards and 9 touchdowns on 56 attempts. So it's just absolutely wild. Yeah. Absolutely wild.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look, I mean, he's rushed, he has over 173 rushes in his career, over 200 catches in his career. We lined him up in the slot a lot. We motioned out of the backfield. We played a lot of 3 wide receiver sets and would have him in there. So if your team's going nickel, that nickel back's got to take a wide out. So we had a lot of mismatches with Jaylen on a linebacker. And that's how he got kind of downfield a lot of times. We just had that mismatch. Wheel route, perfect example. He ran a lot of jet sweeps, coming in motion. We utilized that play a lot. And then in the goal line, he had a lot of he wasn't in the backfield taking handoffs. He was lining up as the tight end, coming around the end and getting a handoff. So offensive coordinators, they found the way to get him the ball.
And actually, I had that wrong. That 368 was actually from 2015. I had it upside down. It was 407 yards rushing and a dozen touchdowns last year. So he actually did better. This is incredible because He's had at least, let's see, in 13 games in each of the last 3 years, and over the 4 years, he had 11 as a freshman. So as a freshman, only 6 receptions, but 96 yards and a touchdown. But when he played as a sophomore, a junior, and senior, 65, 55, and 75 receptions. The 4 touchdowns receiving last year were less than the previous 2 as a sophomore and junior, where he each had 7. So he just piles up yards. 201 receptions, as you mentioned, 1,851 yards, and 19 touchdowns as a receiver, and then 182 carries for 1,107 yards and 28 touchdowns. Just unbelievable. As a running back.
There are some numbers.
Yeah, so from scrimmage combined, 2,958 yards and 47 touchdowns over 4 years in a collegiate career. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what does. I think it's just he doesn't fit a prototypical mold for any of the actual positions he plays on the field. I think, is that safe to assume why he may have, I hate saying fall or drop, because you know what, in the NFL, it doesn't matter if you're 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. As long as you get your foot in the door, then everyone's on a level playing field now. But do you think maybe that's like some of the pro scouts looked at Jaylen and then thought to themselves, they didn't know what to do with him, you know what I mean? So maybe that's why he lasted as long as he did into day 3.
I think that's very interesting, because another quick story, you could even go back to high school. We had a new coach, Coach Dorn. His very first season, he's going around the country, or actually around the state of North Carolina, meeting all the high school coaches. And Jaylen's from Charlotte, so Mallard Creek. It's a huge program here in North Carolina, multiple state titles. Coach went there. He was looking at another guy, and the high school coach was like, hey, Coach, I got this guy. I don't know what position he's going to play in college, but you got to look at him. So where do you plug this guy in? Kind of started way back in high school. And you talk about the draft. I think a lot of mock drafts, and I think we were hoping here for maybe 3rd round, 4th round a little bit. No, we had a lot of talent. We had 7 guys drafted this year. So a lot of the scouts, pro day was huge for us, and we sent so many guys to the combine. But maybe he slipped a little, and maybe, you can only dress 53 guys in the NFL. College, you can dress a lot more guys and have guys in there just for some design plays. So maybe that's why he fell a little. I don't know if 5th round is really falling. I think just getting drafted is a huge accomplishment. And the numbers he put up, you got to remember, this is in the ACC too. I mean, this is a, Power 5 conference that he's doing these numbers with. And just the amount of touches. We meet with TV people every Friday with the offensive coordinators and with the head coach. And every time for 3 years in these TV meetings, our offensive coordinators, our number one thing, we got to get Jaylen the ball. You have to game plan for it. Teams try to take him away, and offensive coordinators had to be creative and just come up with some different things for him. So I think we go kind of how Jaylen goes. If you look at that, 28 rushing touchdowns, 19 receiving touchdowns, that's a lot for any player.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned high school, because I saw his stats as part of a draft blurb where he had 2,300 yards of total offense and 55 touchdowns as a senior in high school. He was the top prospect in the entire state. Yeah,
we came up with a stat. I don't have it off the top. Oh, yeah, I found it now. He scored a touchdown every 2.8 times he touched the ball. That's just – if you're touching the ball 3 times, getting a touchdown, that's pretty productive. And Mallard Creek, it's a huge program, very good, and they face some great competition. So he's been doing this against great high school competition and great college competition.
You know what? That's interesting you said that, too, because I think I have the same type of stat, but in college. Let me see. He has a rate of scoring on every 8.1 attempts. So
yeah,
it's crazy because he breaks tackles with cornerbacks. He runs away from safety, so he has speed. He has wiggle. He's definitely an all-purpose guy. That's what we're trying to illustrate here. But as you're saying,
absolutely.
too, this is a Power 5 conference, ACC. This isn't just Pitt, and I think most people listening, I don't know how many Pitt fans there really are out there. I think there's people who pay attention, I casually pay attention, but I have other teams. I have my alma mater. I'm an Ohio State guy, too. I know there's other listeners that bleed down into West Virginia and their WVU and Mountaineer types, and don't worry, my alma mater will see you this year to open up to. That's a fun place. It was a fun place to go to. Extremely hot 2 years ago, though. And then there's also the Penn State side of things too. So I think a lot of people are really familiar with like Big Ten. If you said, hey, you're doing this against an Ohio State defense or a Penn State defense, real eye-opening. But it's really, some of the teams that are in your division or that you play within the conference themselves, you're looking at like teams like, Florida State, for example, or I don't know, throw out a few more that you had on the schedule over the last year.
Yeah, I was going to say the part of the ACC we're at, every year we play Florida State, Louisville, and Clemson, just to name those three. But those three teams, they're in the top 15 every year. So we get those three teams every year. We've played Notre Dame the last 2 years. We'll cross over. We've played Miami. So, and then in the bowl game, we face the SEC teams. We've got Arizona State last year. So, yeah, the numbers he's put up against some powerful competition is impressive. And we talk about schedule. I don't know if you brought this on a previous podcast, but correct me if I'm wrong, Steelers drafted 3 skill players this year. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I missed
3 offensive.
Yes.
The Steelers, they drafted 3 offensive skill players. The two from Oklahoma State, the one from NC State. All 3 played at Heinz Field this year.
Yes.
And I don't know if it talks about the Pitt defense, but the numbers that those 3 put up at Heinz Field this year, hopefully they can do that as Steelers too. Jaylen went up there, and I think we beat Pitt by a couple scores, but he had 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns, 60 yards rushing, a few receptions. So we had a good trip up at Heinz Field earlier this year. The guys, we do a walkthrough Friday when we get to the stadium, and all of our guys' eyes were so huge just looking at that stadium, and everybody came away so impressed. So, we've seen so many great stadiums, but Heinz Field really stood out this year for a lot of our guys.
Yeah, and you know what? Almost anyone that's had an interview with the team since has said they've had nothing but high praise. I definitely recall reading something from Mason Rudolph talking about it being a big experience. I remember talking to Pitt players from the year before, and one that we had on the show was one of the former tight ends, and he talked about, you get used to just playing there. But what's really kind of unique too, and this is probably no mistake that that all 3 of those players on the offense ended up playing at Heinz Field this year. There's the Steelers and Pitt share not only the stadium, but they're also the practice and training facilities are within the same building too. It's I think it's the UPMC. I don't know if it's just the Rooney or the Art Rooney Sports Complex that they have there on the south side. So. It's a unique dynamic because even some of those guys that come over from Pitt, they're just walking in a different door. For example, it's not much of a big change for them, such as like a James Conner, who Jaylen may very well be sharing carries with in the backfield. It all depends. We know we have a situation. I know you're a Steelers fan. You've been monitoring and seeing what's going on with Le'Veon Bell. So this is kind of almost like insurance in a way because we don't have a whole lot of pro tape on James Conner. I know he's had a few passes thrown in his direction, but nowhere near the volume to say whether or not he is a, what you want to say, suitable kind of do-it-all. I guess the best way to put this is James Conner or whoever it ends up being, if Le'Veon Bell is not in Pittsburgh, be it 2018, 2019, or beyond, it's probably going to be a committee of men who replace him. So this is probably how Samuels best factors in being able to play in the slot in some of these other positions.
Well, and I thought it was interesting, too. Maybe one of the knocks on Jaylen was his speed. But if you look at the combine, he turned in a 4.5 40. And I kind of looked it up today. That was number 9 amongst all the running backs at the combine. So I think his speed is very underrated.
And there's always the running in underwear versus running in pads and then the actual on-the-field speed, too. I mean, some of these guys can fly when they're in their underwear. Some of them don't fly as much with the pads. But then there's also just, you got slow starters, you guys that have a quick burst or quick first step, and, guys that are just elusive. So there's a whole lot of these different attributes because he is just the one thing we noticed with the Steelers, even on defense when looking at, like, the safeties that were drafted, Terrell Edmonds, and to a lesser extent Marcus Allen, is they almost look like hybrid type players. They look like the players that are versatile to play multiple positions, and this is like the same thing with Jaylen Samuels, but on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. You bring up those two safeties everybody's talking about, replacing an inside linebacker. Defense with those two safeties and Jaylen, they really got a bunch of versatile players that will line up different positions. One week you could see them in the slot, the next week exclusively at tight end. So it'll be interesting what the Steelers do with him, this year and everything. And I know everybody down here is going to be very interested to see too, because we've watched him play so many games. So all the fans are cheering for him. He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever talk to. After practice every day, I get the guys and do media interviews, and he was always one of the nicest ones. Came over smiling, did every interview request I ever asked of him. Well spoken. So we every college, your guys are only here for 4 years, and you hate to see them leave, but you always hope they put themselves in a better position. And I definitely think he has.
Absolutely. And it's usually when I get to talk to some of these young men, it's like, the average NFL career is only 3 years. You don't want to spoil the moment, but at the same time, I always end up asking some of these gentlemen whether or not they have plans for the future as well. So jumping over, I guess I'd be remiss to not bring this name up. We discussed this even though he was a transfer, but he does have history with NC State, and you were there at the same time. The Steelers signed an undrafted tight end by the name of, I hope I say it right, Pharoah McKever or McKever.
Now I will say my job is a lot of times to meet with TV folks and meet at stadiums with pronunciations, and I am horrible at it. But Pharoah McKever, yeah.
You know what?
Pharoah McKever.
That's awesome, because I had this same discussion with the other Brian that's usually co-hosting with me, and I think we said it all during the draft. There are definitely a few guys that have joined the roster or around the NFL when we try and I don't have the pronunciation key in front of me, and we were talking about this.
It's hard.
Yeah, we were just talking about this on like a previous show. So I hate butchering everyone's names. Mine gets butchered good. Actually, mine's not even the old world pronunciation. I always say Joe Kuzma. It's kind of the Americanized way of saying it. I believe there were even some extra letters chopped off my name. Could have been Kuzman, whatever. When my great grandparents came off the boat and probably through Ellis Island, at least on one side, I know for sure they did. But it's Kuzma is the way you would say it, old world in the European style over there. But yeah, it's funny that same topic comes up with pronunciation, because we were just literally talking about that. So it blows my mind that guys on TV get it wrong. And I said, you know what, at least I don't feel as guilty if they're screwing up. The guys making the picks during the draft, I couldn't even understand. We thought a whole different player got picked. I forgot who it was, and I don't really want to throw them under the bus, but it's like a former NFL player, and he said someone's name, and we thought, well, did they pick this guy or did they pick this guy? He just, kind of had marbles in his mouth, so to speak. So anyway, I digress. Pharoah McKever. I got it right this time, correct? McKever. Oh, I had it right the first time. Now I'm confusing myself. So not the largest body of work with NC State. He didn't have a whole lot of playing time and ended up transferring to Florida International for his final year of eligibility. But for the time that he was there, I mean, he looks like a big-bodied guy. I think if I saw correctly, let me see, 6'6", 227. I don't know if that's official. But tell us your impressions on him, and, does he have a shot to maybe stick on at least as a practice squad player and maybe work his way up from there?
I tell you, maybe you said maybe not a big body of work, but he was a big body here. I mean, he came from Tabor City, which is down in Wilmington, North Carolina. He came to us. He was actually a high school quarterback. He had to be the biggest high school quarterback down there that we've ever seen. But came here, redshirt as a freshman. He was at wide receiver, and then as a redshirt freshman, we moved into defensive end. He didn't get too many snaps there. He was there for a couple years, and then right before our bowl game one year, he moved to tight end. So with only about, those 15 practices before a bowl game, he was in tight end, and he played there his last year, and he actually graduated, and he went to FIU as a graduate transfer after graduating here from NC State. And, he might not have had many snaps, but NC State fans know he had one play every year, three of our biggest plays. I'll take you through them really quick, but one year at defensive end, we were tied up at Syracuse. He dropped back into coverage, got an interception, returned it for the game-winning touchdown, 70-some yards. And like I said, he was a tight end in the bowl game, and only with a few practices. He only got a couple snaps that game, but snuck out of the backfield one play, an 80-yard touchdown against Mississippi State. And then his final season on special teams, we played, a lot of people don't like to admit it, we played in a hurricane down here. It just poured rain. Tied 3-3. He blocked a punt. We returned it for a touchdown. That was the only touchdown of the game. He gave us the win over Notre Dame. So
wow.
Our fans, we saw him make some big plays down here. He has that big play capability, but he was just behind. I mean, our defensive ends have just – Bradley Chubb, if you just look right there, Contavious Street got drafted. So he was behind some guys, and then to move to tight end, when he moved, he was probably actually third or fourth string tight end. So then he saw that opportunity to transfer, and I saw his stats that he did down there. He looked like he bulked up quite a bit, too, down there. So I think he could be a weapon. Steelers, they're pretty loaded at tight end right now, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of opportunities he gets in preseason camp here and just those preseason games.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say there because they're looking at, they had a 1-year offer extended to Xavier Grimble. He's kind of been a journeyman guy sitting there as the third tight end. Jesse James enters the final year of his contract right now as the number 2. I anticipate them trying to work out maybe an extension or something in the future, probably around camp. I don't think they're just going to let him skate off into free agency. And, he was given the opportunity here, et cetera, et cetera. So I expect him to stick around. The interesting is the number 1 is Vance McDonald because he has the biggest contract of all the guys by NFL standards. I've been going back and forth on Twitter with some colleagues and some guys from a few of the other websites and some fans at Vance McDonald, but he's like 22nd highest paid tight end in the NFL this year. So even by those standards, there are entire tandems like with the Chicago Bears or the Colts where they have 2 tight ends making more money than what Vance McDonald is. So while there's a pecking order right now, I see where Pharoah could maybe carve out a niche there because he's going to be battling Jake McGee, who's going to be a second-year player in the system. He was on the practice squad all of last year, came in in a very similar manner, not with a whole lot of accolades or anything like that. There may be a spot, and they had a very similar sized guy that they were looking at last year, also named Pharoah, who I believe came from I want to say Fordham. He was from a smaller college. He came through the rookie camp and got signed. And
Okay.
So I think they've been kind of looking at bigger, taller targets in that aspect. And if the guy is versatile, I mean, we've seen stranger things. Alejandro Villanueva was a defensive end converted to a tackle on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Roosevelt Nix was a nose tackle, defensive tackle from Kent State in college, becomes a fullback. So you just never know where these guys may apply their talents. We talked about offensive weapon earlier. Versatility is something that the Steelers coaching staff definitely likes. So maybe the best of luck for both of these young men as they try and carve out their niche in the NFL.
I think niche, and I think you have to look at special teams with both of these guys. Like I said, McKever blocked that punt. He's a big body. You put him in there, he can go block that punt. And Jaylen, he returned some kicks. He didn't have that many opportunities, but he returned 12 in his career. Back-to-back games this year, he had 7 because our starting running back, Nyheim Hines, a 4th-round pick for the Colts, he was injured. So Jaylen got that opportunity to go back there and return some kicks. So Jaylen could definitely play some special teams too. He can cover punts. He'd be on kickoff. So I think, that's probably where he's going to get on the field first with that opportunity. McKever, I think, it'll be interesting to see blocking. The Steelers like their tight ends to be able to block. And at least at our time here, we just had him go run some routes and try to catch that ball. So he didn't get those opportunities here at NC State. So I think, those are some opportunities that these guys have.
I think that Jaylen will definitely at least be tested they even put Terrell Watson, the nightmare last year, the real underdog of the whole training camp who ended up making the roster as the number 3. Even he was returning kicks at some point. It seems like the Steelers like to at least deploy one of the running backs on the backup part of that, somewhere on the depth chart. They like to deploy those guys as kick returners where possible. Not a whole lot of kicks getting returned these days anyways, and we still don't know if they're going to change this rule.
Yeah, that's a lot different.
Yeah. So
you're right. It seems like the third running back also had to go back there and return kicks. But, you're taking away kickoff returns now. They're trying to a little bit or just change some of the rules. So those opportunities aren't there as much, but you still got to send somebody back there. So,
there was one other thing. You mentioned Nyheim Hines, and I was just thinking to myself, I think it's very important to bring him up in like the rest of the roster here. It seems like, Jaylen Samuels has got these impressive numbers, and then you also have to mention just all of the other guys that he's competing with for touches in his offense. I mean, Nyheim, he had 197 carries, 1,113 yards, and 12 touchdowns himself. I see also Reggie Gillespie.
Yes.
Yeah, 116 attempts, 506 yards, 7 touchdowns. Each of these guys, Reggie had 13 catches, Nyheim had 12, and then one of the receivers, Jacoby Myers here, 63 catches, 727 yards. So Jaylen actually the leading receiver in receptions, but Jacoby Myers had 727 yards, a little bit more receiving. But you know what? 5 touchdowns to Jaylen's 4. I mean, it's very impressive to see that he's kind of a do-it-all, and he's basically the wide receiver 2, which is what we call Le'Veon Bell a lot of times, and also very much plugged into the running game as well. So very interesting discussion here about all of the NC State prospects, specifically Jaylen here, but also Pharoah. And I really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy day, Brian. And it was funny because, your initials, you were Brian R. too, so I had a hard time differentiating you from my normal cohort here. He's the Robin to my Batman. Just don't tell him I said that.
Gets a little confusing, but, I'm a Northern Brian, too, and I'm just glad his name was B-R-I-A-N as well. There's a lot of B-R-Y-A-Ns down here in North Carolina, so I'm glad, my Northern roots came out a little bit.
Yeah, and by all means, don't be a stranger. Feel free, to always hit us up. We could talk some more maybe at the preseason time rolls around here after training camp and whatnot, or during training camp, and see where Jaylen's hanging, and may even catch up with you somewhere along the lines here if you end up back up at Heinz Field anytime in the near future.
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks for having me on. I love to talk NC State, and everybody at work will tell you I try to drill Steeler knowledge on them all the time, but now that we have a guy up there, I'll be able to talk more and inform more, and I'm really curious where he's going to end up and how the Steelers can use him this year. So, but thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll give you one bonus question here. It's kind of almost like I had mentioned earlier, I'm a Northeast Ohio guy, so I always have to deal with Cleveland Browns fans. But who are you dropping the Steelers knowledge on there in your little portion of the world here, or portion of the country? Are you dealing with Panthers fans or?
I will say it's a little bit of the Panthers, and Panthers are on Fox, Steelers are on CBS, and anytime the Panthers cross over and come on CBS and bump the Steelers off, I get a little attitude with my friends that follow the Panthers, and they like to rib me for that. So sometimes I have to listen to the Steelers broadcast, just on the radio on my computer when the Panthers are on TV. But I think we have a lot of Panthers fans. North Carolina, especially Raleigh, it's a lot of transplants. So you just have people like in every team down here. It's a really great mix. Charlotte's probably about 2.5, 3 hours away, and they've done really great, the Carolina Panthers have over there. So there's a lot more Carolina fans, but I still think the Pittsburgh fans, there's definitely a lot down here. We have 2 bars that are Steeler bars, so Pittsburgh fans travel, and there's a lot of Pittsburgh fans that have traveled to North Carolina, so it's great to catch up with a lot of people like that.
Yeah, it truly is great. We have Steelers bars here as well. I live in directly in smack dab in the middle between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. So my wife is actually a Browns fan.
Okay.
So it's good to hear Steelers Nation being worldwide. We've talked to people, especially, down in Mexico. I mean, it's huge. Yeah. There's fans over in the UK. There's Steeler bars there too. So truly worldwide, whether it be North Carolina or wherever it be. We have a Panthers guy actually on the staff too. He's one of our draft gurus, believe it or not. Being Steelers geared, this young man is just, he's always dropping. He's already on to the 2019 2019 draft. But he was pretty he was pretty excited for us about the whole Jaylen Samuels pick too. So we'll definitely, I know I'm geeked up and can't wait to see how it works out. So Brian,
absolutely.
Thanks again for joining us today on the Steel City Underground podcast. I want to thank all of our new subscribers too. I mean, we're rolling on YouTube pretty strong. I know people are listening on other platforms as well. So truly, from myself and everyone else here, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for tuning in. My name's Joe Kuzma, and until next time, be safe, be good, and we will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.